In 1950, a police chief somewhere in America walked into a Ford dealership and did something no chief before him had ever been able to do. He ordered a police car, not a civilian sedan to be cut up and modified at the department garage, but a fully equipped, factory-built police car straight off Ford's assembly line. It was the first of its kind ever sold in America, and it would quietly reshape how every police car in the country was bought, built, and sold. From 1945 to 1950, American police departments faced a problem nobody had ever solved. World War II had ended 5 years earlier. Departments had emerged from the war with broken-down fleets and exhausted budgets. Civilian car production was finally back at full tilt, but the cars Detroit was building were not designed for the punishment of police work. Departments could buy them, they just could not keep them running. You'll see what happened when post-war police fleets started failing at rates that wrecked maintenance budgets. You'll see why Ford's competitors, GM, Chrysler, and the independents, let Ford have a 5-year head start in a category Ford essentially invented. And you'll see the single option code on a 1950 Ford order form that, on paper, looks completely unremarkable, but set the template for how every police car in America has been built ever since. When World War II ended in 1945, American police departments had been making do for years. Detroit had stopped civilian car production in 1942 to build military hardware. For the entire war, departments maintained whatever they already owned, mostly pre-war Fords and Chevrolets from the late 1930s. By 1945, those cars had been driven into the ground. Engines were tired, frames were rusting, populations were booming after the war, and the cars meant to patrol those new neighborhoods were one bad winter away from total collapse. Buying a new patrol car in 1946 was not like buying one today. A department would walk into a local Ford or Chevrolet dealer, order a civilian sedan, then send it to the department's own garage or to a third-party upfitter. There, mechanics installed heavier springs, a larger battery, a radio bracket, sometimes an upgraded oil cooler. Every department did it differently. No two patrol cars in America were identically modified. A part that worked in Chicago might not exist in St. Louis. The system was, by any reasonable definition, chaotic, and the cars themselves were not up to the job. The 1947 Ford was a fine family sedan. It was not designed to idle for hours while powering a radio that drew more current than the rest of the electrical system combined. It was not designed for hot pursuit on a hot summer day, with a heavy-set officer behind the wheel and 2 more in the back. Generators failed. Brake drums warped. Suspensions sagged within months. Fleet managers reported patrol cars wearing out far faster than civilian cars and costing the city a great deal more to keep on the road. For Ford Motor Company, this was a problem of a different kind. In the late 1940s, Ford was fighting to hold its ground in the consumer market. General Motors had taken the lead with Chevrolet. Chrysler's Plymouth was eating into Ford's share. What Ford did have was the largest dealer network in America and a fleet sales team that talked to police departments every single day. By 1949, those salesmen were bringing back the same story from department after department. The cars were not working and somebody needed to fix it. And so Ford did something simple. Instead of waiting for someone else to solve it, Ford decided to do the modifications itself, on the assembly line, with standard parts, at a price every department could see on the order form. The result was a single new line item that any fleet buyer could check. What looked like a small, almost bureaucratic decision was about to create an entirely new category of American automobile. Ford's police package debuted in 1950, built on the Ford Custom line. From the outside, it looked identical to a civilian Custom. From the dealer's perspective, it was an option code. From a department's perspective, it was a completely new kind of product. The package included heavy-duty front and rear springs, upgraded shock absorbers, a larger generator to feed the radio, a heavy-duty battery, an oil bath air filter, and a larger trunk sized to fit bulky AM police radios. There is a small but honest wrinkle worth mentioning. That first 1950 package was actually built on the carried-over 1949 body. Ford's own archivists confirmed this. But 1950 is the year it became a true factory option. The first time in America you could order a police car instead of building one. The early buyers were exactly the agencies that had been modifying civilian cars for years. State highway patrols like California and Texas. Departments with the budgets and the mileage to care most about durability. They bought the factory version almost immediately. And then something notable happened. The factory cars didn't just match the modified ones, they outlasted them. Departments reported the factory-built Fords holding up far better and cutting maintenance costs because the parts had been engineered to work together on an assembly line. A department hacking parts together in its own garage simply couldn't match that consistency, no matter how good its mechanics were. A quick, honest caveat on the numbers. The durability and cost savings figures that float around for these cars are estimates, not audited data. But the direction is well documented. The factory package was meaningfully tougher and cheaper to run than the do-it-yourself approach it replaced. The thing that locked the Ford police car into the public imagination came from television. Dragnet began as a radio drama in 1949. By December 1951, it was on NBC. Sergeant Joe Friday, bland, methodical, deadly serious, drove a black and white Ford patrol car through every episode. The car was never the star, and that was the point. The Ford police package looked like a normal car, drove like a normal car, and quietly did its job like a normal car. Joe Friday's Ford became the platonic ideal of the American police vehicle. The image stuck for 30 years. The hard numbers behind that image were modest but real. A fully equipped Ford custom police sedan listed for around $1,700, a little more than a civilian custom, but far less than a civilian car plus a pile of aftermarket modifications. Engine options ran from the 95 horsepower inline-six to the 100 horsepower 239 cubic inch flathead V8, good for roughly 85 miles per hour. Ford sold several thousand police spec customs in 1950, a small number against civilian sales, but enough to make Ford the undisputed leader in a market category that a year earlier had not existed. If this kind of deep, weird automotive history is something you want more of, subscribe. There is a whole series of these coming. Most accounts of the 1950 Ford end right here. Ford, the proud inventor of the police package, innovation rewarded, and that story is true. But it sits inside a bigger one, because while Ford had this category essentially to itself for 5 years, the rest of the American auto industry was watching. And what the package revealed wasn't just a clever product, it was a preview of which car makers had the scale to survive the decade ahead and which ones didn't. In 1950, the American auto industry wasn't just the Big Three. It was the Big Three plus a thriving group of independents: Hudson, Studebaker, Packard, Nash. These companies had sold cars to police departments for decades. Hudson's Hornet was so dominant in stock car racing that a handful of departments reportedly ran them as pursuit cars. But none of the independents could easily match a factory police package. They didn't have the engineering depth, the tooling flexibility, or the dealer network to make a low-volume specialty product pay. Now, here is where it is important to be precise, because this is where the story usually gets oversold. The police package did not kill the independents. It is worth saying that plainly. Hudson, Packard, Studebaker, and Nash collapsed for much bigger reasons. They couldn't match the Big Three's economies of scale. They got crushed in the brutal Ford versus GM price war of the early 1950s, and they couldn't afford the constant restyling the market demanded. Police fleet sales were a rounding error on their books. And notice the timeline. Chevrolet didn't launch its own police package until 1955, and Chrysler's Dodge package didn't arrive until 1956. So for the entire window when the independents were failing, two of the three giants didn't have a police package either, and they were just fine. Lacking one clearly wasn't fatal. So here is the honest version, and it is actually the more interesting one. The police package didn't kill the independents, but it is a near-perfect illustration of the exact disadvantage that did. Ford could spread the cost of engineering a niche, low-volume specialty car across hundreds of thousands of vehicles, then sell it through the biggest dealer network in the country. Hudson and Packard couldn't. The 1950 Ford police package is a small, vivid window into the scale gap that doomed the independents, not the weapon that killed them, but a perfect snapshot of why they couldn't compete. In 1950, somewhere in America, a police chief walked into a Ford dealership and ordered a police car off the lot. He probably did not think of it as a historic moment. To him, it was just a more convenient way of getting what he had been getting for years, a patrol car set up for police work, ready to go. But that single act, repeated thousands of times across the country in the years that followed, set off a chain reaction nobody predicted. It changed how police cars were sold. It changed how departments budgeted for fleets. And it set the template for every police package built since, from the 1955 Buick Century to the Crown Victoria Police Interceptor to the modern Charger Pursuit. Not bad for an option code on a Ford order form. This is Badges and Chrome, the channel that covers the police car's history almost forgot. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.